There have been roughly 18,000 gods that have existed in one form or another throughout history. They existed in the form of hieroglyphs in ancient temples and countless statues and figurines, but none of them were real, at least not according to the supernatural claims people made about their divinity. And just because people conjured up so many different gods throughout time, doesn't mean that perhaps humanity has been onto an undiscovered truth all along, as if there really is a god, but we're just still too small-minded to find the real one. If anything, the fact that humans have come up with thousands of gods proves something else. We have a faulty thought process that causes us to personify and anthropomorphize forces of nature we have yet to understand and much less control, especially forces of nature that threaten our well-being and very existence. It's why we've had gods of thunder, such as Thor, which we unwittingly honor every Thursday, or Mars, the god of war, that we named the planet after. It's also why we've had characters like Mother Nature and Father Time. And that personification reflex even happens to atheist scientists who often speak about evolution as if it's some sort of person with intention instead of the indifferent, random process that it is. Whenever I hear Richard Dawkins lament about how evolution can be cruel in its efficiency and even blind in how it operates, he almost lapses into that reflex of talking about evolution as if it's a human with a grand plan. While it's true, no one can prove a negative, we can debunk a myth, and we have done so numerous times, which is why there are no serious discussions about whether the Greek god Zeus was the true god all along, or maybe it was Horus from Egyptian mythology, or perhaps the reason why there's still so much evil in the world is because we stopped performing human sacrifices to the Aztec sun god of war Huitzilopochtli. No professional scholars or scientists are wasting their time with these questions, because logic and reason has ruled out these belief systems for the fabricated claims they are, no matter how unfalsifiable they are rhetorically speaking. Yet so much of modern religions are demonstrably based on these past mythologies. So why can't billions of people apply that same logistical process to the few remaining gods nowadays in the 21st century? Particularly religious conservatives who pride themselves in spotting fake news, but they can't seem to apply that same logic to see through the ultimate fake news that are all remaining religions. By the way, I sincerely don't mean that as a disrespect to anyone. It was interesting the amount of negative feedback I got on my last video, how to tell all religions are false, including the secular ones. And I'll be the first to admit, it's a fool's errand to try to convince any religious people that their religion is false. And not only because there's already so many atheists out there who've been trying to do so for years, but because religions are a very personal experience as to how people process reality and make sense of their lives. Not to mention, no one can undo a lifetime of thought processes and conditioned habits that have been hardwired into the brain by millions of neural pathways overnight. For many religious people, like I used to be, it can take years to finally break free from that way of thinking, no matter how much they can sense that they're false. And I'm well aware of the fact that it can be very jarring to hear that your belief system isn't true, just like I remember going through that when I was younger. But it's precisely because I'm aware of all the harm that religions cause that far outweigh the good people think they provide. That's why I hope to plant yet another seed of truth about reality that is so desperately needed by our species to finally solve the problems we continue repeating over and over, which we could avoid in the first place altogether if it weren't for the religious reflexes that blind us to reality. And that's the point of this video. While I'm no scientist and much less a psychologist or neurologist, and far from the first person to point out the connection between the faulty ways our brains process information which lead to religious misinterpretations of reality, it's imperative that we speak about religiosity more from that angle than to continue debating whether God is real or not. Just like there's no need to debate whether any of the tens of thousands of ancient gods were the real deal, without turning this video into a 2-hour debate using ontological dialectics and almost deliberately confusing terms about presuppositions and metaphysics, we can use very basic logic to rule out the remaining gods and religions that continue to persist nowadays, simply beginning with, all their conflicting claims about reality can't be true at the same time. And there are many scientifically documented reasons that explain why people still believe in God, such as our difficulty in dealing with death, let alone pain and suffering while we're still alive, and whether that suffering is due to nature or the unconscionable selfishness caused by others. After all, having faith in a God functions as not only a psychological coping mechanism, but a neurological stress management system that keeps us from having nervous breakdowns when we're overloaded with negativity we know we have no control over. But one reason that is rarely spoken about as to why people still believe in gods is our inability to accept the indifference and randomness that is the very fabric of all existence. How all the atoms that make up all the matter and energy of our known universe are almost certainly not operating with any grand plan or intention. The opposite is most likely true. Human perceptions that lead to concepts such as intention and gods are byproducts of the complexity that emerges from the underlying chaos that makes up all existence, not the other way around. Granted, I'm known to say that with absolute certainty. After all, I'm no scientist or expert at anything. Hell, I don't even have a bachelor's degree in my own field of study, which is being a lowly graphic designer. However, I am a human being who has every right to investigate the reality I find myself living in. And just like I don't need to be a plumber to unclog my toilet, I don't need a PhD in cosmology or world history to realize there seems to be no divinely ordained, much less loving intention to the way reality functions, simply from observing how all living organisms need to kill and eat other living organisms just to survive, and for a fleeting amount of time no less. And in the animal kingdom, organisms still eat each other alive, every day, by the millions, causing agonizing, excruciating pain for each other, sometimes eating their own species and offspring. And when you consider that is the default setting to all biological life forms, it's no wonder that even a more consciously aware species, such as humanity, that can be capable of love, kindness for strangers, and planning for years into the future, can also end up massacring itself from time to time through wars, genocides, human slavery, and a whole host of other violent, primal behavior that is hardwired into our very neurons that are ultimately made up of atoms in a perpetual state of motion that attract and repel from each other without any intention. That's why I'm declaring it's high time in human history that we stop debating the validity of modern religions, just like we've stopped debating the validity of the ancient ones. It's high time instead to be engaging in more discussions about the psychology and neurology that causes people to believe in demonstrably fictitious supreme beings and supernatural agents, especially considering all the new religions and cults that seem to crop up every generation, particularly the ones that we know are fabricated, such as Scientology or the cargo cults of Papua New Guinea, whose inhabitants worshipped a white Western man like John Frum and were awaiting his return as if he's a Messiah, much like Christians are awaiting for the return of Jesus Christ. The cargo cults of Papua New Guinea should serve as the ultimate scientific case study as to the predictably faulty thinking patterns our brains reflexively engage in as we try to make sense of reality. Gods and religions don't continue existing simply because billions of people fear death, or can't resolve the question of evil, or because the conformity of tribalism and groupthink, or even what's the point of living if existence has no ultimate purpose. Like I said, I'm no expert or scientist, but I would like to posit a scientific hypothesis in this video, as amateur as it may sound. That is, if no one else has presented this idea, which if they have, please let me know in the comments below. Here's my hypothesis. The major reason why religions persist is the human brain's inability to comprehend the indifference and randomness that is the very fabric of existence and the engine of all creation. How concepts such as intention, meaning, and destiny are byproducts of the purposeless chaos of matter and energy being in a constant state of change, not the other way around. And when you couple our inability to process the indifference and randomness being the engine of existence with our reflex to personify and anthropomorphize abstract ideas into easy to understand supernatural beings, you get God, and a lot of them. And you also get the age-old sayings such as God is great, or Allahu Akbar according to Muslims, and why almost all religious people pride themselves in being God-fearing, because what we all ultimately fear is uncertainty about our survival. All of existence wasn't created by some god that just wants to play hide-and-go-seek with its own creation to see who is worthy of earning its love. That is a human construct most likely rooted in inevitably flawed parent-child relationships almost everyone goes through, some clearly worse than others. Our very consciousness is the byproduct of a long, chaotic process of trial and error, resulting in highly complex organisms that can process reality through senses and memories. In other words, evolution. And in no way, shape, or form am I claiming to have come up with that theory. But the fact that millions of people still can't wrap their heads around evolution, and even Charles Darwin, who practically came up with the theory, couldn't conceive of evolution without the help of a god, goes to show the faulty personification thought process we have yet to evolve past. Because again, what really boggles people's minds is how the known universe and other possible universes, perhaps created by black holes that become big bangs on the other end, how all of this most likely has no intention, no grand plan, and yet we can't call it nothing either. But the truth about reality is everything probably exists without any creator just because. It is what it is. And I get it. That's not a satisfying answer and much less a bona fide scientific theory. But it's exactly what religious people say about God too. Just like the wheels of logic stop spinning in most religious people's minds when they justify their God of choice by saying he doesn't need a reason to exist or explain himself. That's quite possibly the very same reason why everything exists. And the ability to accept that anything can exist just because, whether it's a god or not, is a universal intuition shared by both believers and non-believers. Only the believers continue personifying that intuition, while atheists like myself no longer feel the need to do so. But I get it. It's a lot easier to process existence as a god thanks to our personification reflexes, and particularly a god that will grant us the same eternity that we're already a part of, but not in the way we wish it to be. Not without the threats to our survival, for example. Not without having to work for a living. Not without having to make trade-offs all the time. And especially not without aging and entropy and ultimately death. And because our brains need to make sense of the world around us, especially through a personification process, our brains have demonstrated they're not insistent upon accuracy or facts. Our brains just need a sense of closure to get through the day. And if that closure comes with factual accuracy backed up by evidence, it can be welcomed. But even that's not always the case. Because another unfortunate reflex of the human brain not spoken enough about is how our brains sometimes prefer falsehoods that confirm biases which secure or enhance our survival. And this is why reality can be so counterintuitive. There is more than enough evidence that proves how our brains personified forces of nature to help make sense of reality. And every single god, past and present, is the result of that personification reflex. And this is why it can be said that gods exist, but they aren't real. And this is why the answer to the age-old question, did God create man or did men create gods, can be answered without a shadow of a doubt by saying men created gods, and thousands of them. And this is also why history repeats itself, and we can't seem to solve so many of the problems we continue to make that could be avoided in the first place, because of certain faulty reflexes that blind us not only to reality, but to the solutions to our problems. And the more we keep relying on these demonstrably fictitious gods to solve our problems and then assume they don't answer our prayers because they have some grander plan at hand, the vicious cycle continues. But if it's survival, purpose, and happiness we're after, we need to officially identify and get past these faulty mental reflexes. We can still find meaning and purpose and love and morality by adhering to reality instead of false narratives and fictitious supreme beings. By not fearing the wrath of an imaginary god, our moral decisions would be so much truer and consistent. Our love for family and friends that more genuine. Our purpose and fulfillment would be more profound, and our lives would be that much more worth living. If I got anything wrong in this video, please let me know in the comments below. But if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell for upcoming videos, and check out the links below for my original art and merchandise. And thanks for watching.